So this is for my game design course. I'm going to go through the Mr. Smiley game up to this point, starting from the very beginning. So I'm actually in our Google Classroom site. I'm going to click on Classwork and go to the first video game design project, or first video game project, and click on the assets down here. It's a zip file, so I'm actually going to download the zip file. And then when I open the zip file, I'm just going to extract these to my root drive on the network. So I'm just going to select my root drive, click extract, and it will have opened those assets, and they're right here. And there they are. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'm going to close that, and I'm going to go to GameMaker, and we're going to start this game. So I'm going to click New, click Drag and Drop, and go ahead and name this Mr. Smiley so that I differentiate it from the Mr. Smiley game that we've created earlier. So I'm going to click Save, and that should create the game. So now in this game we are going to use some of these resources over here. This is our workspace, so everything that we do will happen over here. So we'll be using sprites, which are just the pictures in the game. We'll be using sounds for the game. We will be using objects, which are the parts of the game that we'll actually control and what we use to play the game. And then we'll be using rooms. You'll see that rooms is highlighted because there's already a room here, and every game has to have at least one room. So what GameMaker does is that when it creates a game, it gives you a room automatically. And we can of course change the settings for the room, which we'll do later. But for right now, we just know we have a room there and we can start creating resources. So I'm going to go up here to sprites. We're going to start by creating all of our sprites. So I right click on sprites, select create sprite, and I get a sprite here. And the first thing I'm going to do is rename it. And all of our sprites are going to start with SPR for sprite, and then the name of the character that will be that sprite. So for this one, this is Mr. Smiley. And now I'm going to import one of the pictures that I downloaded in my assets. So I'm going to go to my main, or my root drive on the network. I'm going to go to the game one Maze Chase game assets, and I'm going to select smiley.png and click open. And then this pops up asking me if I want to continue because importing files is not undoable. So I click yes, I want to continue because I wanted that. So we take a look here. Mr. Smiley is 32 by 32 in terms of size, and that's for most of our images. That's what it's going to be for this game. And then above here we have the origin, and I can select the origin. I could click on the origin. For this one, we're actually going to select middle center for the origin, and that means that when we use the Mr. Smiley sprite and we talk about where the object is, it's going to be located, the coordinates of the object are going to be at the center of that object. Okay? There's also a collision mask, which shows you where the sprite will be detecting collisions. So it'll be checking on whether other sprites are touching this collision mask. We're only going to check this one though, we're not going to check the rest, because they all should be pretty much the same, just covering the area that is covered by the actual image. Alright, so we're done with this. I'm going to click close, and I'm going to add my other sprites. So I'm going to add the Mr. Skull sprite, SPR, Mr. Skull. That one will import the skull sprite. And then, oh yeah, click make its origin middle center. We'll add the apple sprite. And that one, we don't want to edit the image though. It's not what I wanted. I just wanted to import. So that one's the apple. And then finally we'll add the wall. Now the wall is going to be a little bit different because when it comes to the wall sprite, first thing you'll notice, SPR wall, import it. The wall sprite is only 16 by 16. Because it's going to form the wall, I'm actually going to leave its origin at the top left. And that'll make it easier to tile them on screen. when we get to that point. So for this, the wall is going to be half the size of each of those sprites, and that way we can make a more dynamic maze and create more space in the maze for Mr. Smiley to move, so that we're not having to be absolutely 100% perfect in moving through the maze, and that's going to be an important thing. So that's it for creating the sprites. I'm going to go ahead and start by creating the Mr. Smiley object. So to create the Mr. Smiley object, I'm going to right-click on Objects, click Create Object, and we're going to call this one OBJ Mr. Smiley because it's an object, but it's going to represent Mr. Smiley. And objects may or may not have associated sprites. In this case, because Mr. Smiley is a character on screen, we're going to associate it with the sprite Mr. Smiley. And then we're going to leave everything else the same for now. We're going to leave the collision mask same as the sprite. It's got to be visible, and then we're going to actually add events to make things work. So the basic way that it works in GameMaker is that events happen, they trigger, and when those events trigger, then we program actions that will cause something to happen on screen. So in this case, to move Mr. Smiley, that's the first thing we're going to do, is we're going to add the event key down. Now there's 3 different key events. There's key down, key pressed, key up. We're using key down because key down will fire or trigger when the key is pressed and held, which is what we want. When we press and hold the key, we want to move. Key pressed will only trigger once when it's pressed, and then key up will only trigger once when it's released. So we're selecting key down. We're going to start with left, and all of our movements are going to follow the same sort of pattern. When we press the left key, we want to move Mr. Smiley. To move Mr. Smiley, what we're really going to do is we're going to change Mr. Smiley's X coordinate. So we're going to click and drag over an assign variable. Assign variable allows you to assign a value to a variable. A variable in programming is any sort of container that holds a value that can change. In this case, we're going to use one that's built in called X, which is just the X coordinate of the current object. We could, if we used a name that didn't exist already, we could create our own variable if we need for our games. And then for a value, we want to change Mr. Smiley's X by moving left. We're using an XY coordinate system, but unlike math, the 0, 0 spot is not in the middle. 0, 0 is actually up here in the upper left corner. That's because we read left to right and top to bottom. So if 0, 0 is here, everything is positive moving to the right, everything is positive moving down for Y. That means moving left would be negative for X, and moving up would be negative for Y. So we're going to use -4 as the value. But you notice over here it says set X to -4, which really means that I'm going to change the X value to -4, which would just put Mr. Smiley, or give him an X value of -4, which is not what we want. We want to change his X value by -4. So I'm going to click relative, and that's what relative will do. And relative changes the statement over here that says add -4 to X, which will mean the same thing as like subtracting 4 from X. But that will move Mr. Smiley from where he's at 4 pixels to the left, because it'll take whatever the X value currently is, it'll add -4 to it, and then it'll store it back in that value. So let's just check this out to make sure it works. So I'm going to click the run button, and then when I finish, when it actually runs, I should be able to press the left key and have it move. Oh wait, you know what? You'll notice this will happen to you too. If you click run, nothing happens, and that's because we haven't actually added a Mr. Smiley object to the room. So I have to go to the room, and then I'm going to drag out a Mr. Smiley object. Objects don't magically appear in your rooms, you actually have to put them there. So now that I've put Mr. Smiley there, if I click run, we should see Mr. Smiley, and if I press the left key, I move to the left. Okay? If I press any of the other keys, nothing's going to happen because I haven't programmed those yet. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the object though, click on my workspace, And then we're going to go ahead and do the rest of the keys right now. So I'm going to add a key down for right. Now the key down for right is, oops, the key down for right is we're going to assign the variable. We're still assigning the value of x, but now we're assigning it with a positive value and clicking relative because we're moving to the right 4. So left and right are done. Let's do up and down. For up, we're still assigning a variable, but this time we're assigning the value of y, or we're assigning the variable y a value of -4 because we're moving up, and we're going to check relative to make sure that it adds -4 to y. And then we'll do one more of those, key down, down, and then we will assign the y variable a value of 4 and click relative. So now we just check. We're going to add -4 to x when we press left, add 4 to x when we move right, add -4 to y when we move up, when we press up, and then add 4 to y when we press down. So now let's check this. We don't have to add another Mr. Smiley. He's already in the room. We just need to check and see that he can move all 4 directions, which he can. So this is always a good time once we've got something we know is working. Go ahead and click save. So now we're going to add the apple that Mr. Smiley is going to collect. When Mr. Smiley collects the apple, it's going to disappear. First thing we need though is the object. So we need to create a new object called obj apple, and then we're going to set its sprite to the apple sprite, and then we're going to talk about what this really means. So in GameMaker, when you add objects to a room like we did Mr. Smiley, it's called an instance of that object. You can have many instances of an object in a room. You don't only have to have one instance. It all depends on your game. If you have if you have many instances, they'll all behave the same way because they're just copies of the original object. So we only have to program this once for this apple, and then we have to just set it up so that every time that Mr. Smiley touches an apple, it will disappear. So we're going to add the event called collision, and we have to select a specific object to collide with, in this case Mr. Smiley, and we're going to slide over, and to make the instance of the apple disappear, we're simply going to use this one here called destroy instance. So it destroys it and removes it from the room. And when we drag it over, there's no options because we don't need to do anything else. We just need to destroy it. And that's it. So now, if we go back to the room and we add a bunch of apple objects, which we can click and drag over, we can also press and hold the Alt key, and then we can press and we can put objects in the room. Okay, so now we're going to test this to see if our object works. So I'm going to run it, and then I'm going to try and collect the apples and see if that works. So, and you can see as Mr. Smiley touches an apple, they disappear. Okay, and when I click close, they're still here in the original setup of the room. They just, during the game, they disappeared. So once again, we've made some significant changes. Let's go ahead and save. So now the last thing we're going to do is we're going to create the wall object, and we're going to make it so that Mr. Smiley stops at the wall. Okay. The thing is, we're not going to do it how you might think what we would do it. It sounds like what we would do is we would create a wall object, and then when Mr. Smiley runs into the wall, either way we do that, we just stop Mr. Smiley. Actually, what we're going to do is we're going to think about it in terms of, is Mr. Smiley allowed to move, and base it on whether there's a wall there or not. So we're really going to say, if there's not a wall in the direction Mr. Smiley wants to move, then allow him to move that way. Okay, so we need a wall object first, obj wall, and then of course we need to select the wall sprite, and then we're actually done with the wall for now, because we're going to go back to Mr. Smiley's object. Quick way to do that, double click on it and go back here, and what we're going to do is I'm going to go back to the key down left event, and we still have our assigned variable there. And what we're going to do in this event is we're going to check and see if there's a wall in the way before we move. And really we're going to say, is there not a wall in the way before we move? And we're going to use what's called a conditional. And a conditional is just an if-then statement in programming. If something is true, then do this action. If something is not true, then we're not going to do anything. The one we're going to use is called if object at place, and I'm going to drag this up above the assigned variable for now. Alright? So if object at place checks to see if there is an object at a specific spot on the screen. So we're checking while we're in the Mr. Smiley object if there's a wall nearby. Specifically, if there's a wall close to, or if there's a wall in the direction that I want to move. So what we're going to do is I'm going to check both of these relative boxes, because it means the same thing it does down here in the assigned variable. I don't want to check if we're at an absolute spot. I want to check, is there a wall 4 pixels to my left? Which means I'm going to leave y as 0 because I'm not moving up or down. I want to check to the left 4, which is -4, just like our movement is. The other box I'm going to check is the not. And I check the not box because this, if I didn't, this would check if there is a wall. And then when I move this over to here so that it results in that action, if this is true, then it would actually move if there was a wall, which is not what I want. So I'm going to click not to flip that. It flips it to say, if there is not a wall 4 pixels to my left, then allow me to move left 4 pixels. So now let's check and see that that works. I'm going to click run. Oh, you know what I forgot to do though? Forgot to add a wall. So it's not going to work anyway because there's not a wall. So let's add some wall here. And I'm going to go ahead and before I begin, I'm just going to go ahead and make a wall all the way around. Oh, and you know what? We're getting weird looking wall, and that's because I need to change my grid in here from 32 to 16. And that's because, remember, my wall sprite is 16 by 16. So I'm going to change it to 16 by 16 so that the wall will fit nicely in here. So that's what I'm going to do. Click and hold Alt, and I'm going to make wall objects all the way around. It doesn't matter if it's perfect, it just matters that they're all the way around. So now, when I click run, Mr. Smiley should not move when I hit the wall. Now it's not going to work for up, down, left, or right. That's because I haven't programmed that yet. But now when I get outside, it obviously won't let me go back in, at least that way. So I have to go back in another way. Alright, so let's finish this off. I'm going to go back to Mr. Smiley. I'm going to go back to each of my key downs, and we're going to fix each one of them the same way. We're going to add in, you'll notice when you start using stuff under your recently used tab in the toolbox, you'll be able to find the ones you just recently used. So we're going to do the same thing. If object at place, select wall, click both of the relative boxes, but this time for right, I'm going to use 4 instead of -4 for x. Then I'm just going to click and drag assign variable, click the not, and I'm done. And I'm going to just do that for all 4 of these. Or for the remaining 2, I guess, now. Object wall, this time, this is key down up, so -4 for y, click not, drag the assigned variable over. Key down down, same thing, add the if object at place, obj wall, click both relative boxes, 4 there, not, and move the assigned variable. So now they all look the same again. They're checking to see if there's a wall in the way of where I want to move, and if there's not, move. So let's see that this works, and I shouldn't get out of the box now. Should end up staying inside. So now, there it is. I'm staying inside of the box. I'm not allowed to go through any wall in any direction, no matter what. Okay, so that catches us up. We're going to save it, and we are done for now.